When U.S. and allied forces initiate targeted kinetic strikes against Iranian military installations, the immediate tactical objectives are almost certain to be met. The physical tools of the state are systematically degraded, nuclear processing facilities are destroyed, and vast ballistic missile stockpiles neutralized before leaving their silos. This military campaign targets the apex of the Islamic Republic, aiming to eliminate senior leadership and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The strategy rests on the assumption that removing the top command will trigger elite fragmentation, naturally giving way to a more compliant, externally managed successor government. But achieving military superiority over a specific target is a narrow success. Treating a complex state of 90 million people as an isolated battlefield ignores the systemic vulnerabilities inherent to the modern Middle East. The actual blast radius of this conflict is defined by the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical structural choke point. Historically, this geography was a single-layer vulnerability, the primary node for global fossil fuels. Today, it's layered with the IMAC trade network from Mumbai to Europe. Beneath that sits a third layer, AI compute infrastructure, with high-density servers connected by Red Sea fiber optic cables. Military planners often evaluate the risk to these systems in isolation, weighing the disruption of oil shipments against the value of a neutralized adversary. But these three layers are tightly coupled. A tactical strike inside Iran threatens an integrated global contagion, simultaneously hitting the fossil fuel economy and 21st-century digital infrastructure. The baseline economic threat begins with the 21 million barrels of crude and 18% of global LNG shipments that traverse this 21-mile-wide corridor every day. The three-phase supply disruption pattern starts with market chaos in the first 12 hours, as shipping companies freeze operations. Facing a 10 million barrel per day capacity loss, lines initiate emergency rerouting down and around the Cape of Good Hope. This diversion adds up to 3 weeks of transit time and causes war risk insurance premiums to surge as much as 500% above baseline rates. If the conflict persists beyond 6 months, oil prices are projected to reach $130 to $180 per barrel. At these levels, global GDP contracts by as much as 2.5%. This energy shock transmits directly into the supply chain, driving up transportation costs and fanning persistent consumer inflation. Sustained oil prices at these levels box in the U.S. Federal Reserve, forcing them to choose between fighting entrenched inflation or triggering a recession, effectively punishing the U.S. domestic economy for a foreign strike. The collateral damage extends to the political and economic integration of the IMEC trade corridor, a project backed by significant multilateral consensus. The geopolitical purpose of IMEC is to de-risk European supply chains from China, while structurally anchoring India to the west. Regional instability paralyzes the physical capital behind this route, specifically the $9 billion Vadhavan Deepwater Port project currently under development in India. Corresponding European infrastructure, such as the $1 billion Green Fuels Corridor terminating at the port of Rotterdam, faces similar paralysis. Kinetic conflict in the Levant and the Gulf physically severs this meticulously planned multimodal network before it can reach scale. Without a secure IMEC, global trade is forced back onto vulnerable sea lanes or competitor land routes, like Russia's international north-south transport corridor. By destabilizing the Gulf to neutralize Iran, the West inadvertently paralyzes its own primary alternative to Chinese global hegemony. The final infrastructure layer is AI compute. U.S. domestic data center energy demand is projected to triple by 2028, creating a massive bottleneck for the American grid. To bypass these constraints, the U.S. tech sector is offshoring its most critical AI infrastructure to energy-abundant Gulf states. In this context, compute now functions as the new oil. It requires massive upfront capital, relies on strategic choke points, and underpins modern military supremacy. This map shows the dense bundle of undersea fiber optic cables running through the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the critical physical vulnerability for offshored compute. This vulnerability is already being tested. In 2024, Red Sea cable cuts wiped out 25% of regional internet traffic in a single event. Offshore data centers and the specific power grids required to run them are completely static targets in an active war zone. Despite achieving domestic energy independence, the U.S. has created a new, unhedged strategic dependency. It now relies on the Persian Gulf to power its 21st century technological lead. These strikes rely on the expectation that removing an authoritarian regime leads to a rapid, manageable transition from the outside. But the intervention models used in Iraq and Afghanistan fail to account for Iran's size and urbanization. This is a state of 90 million people with a deeply embedded security apparatus. Decapitation is likely to yield elite fragmentation, resulting in a violent power struggle between IRGC remnants, the conventional military, and regional proxies. These leaderless factions are likely to target the static, high-value infrastructure layers, oil terminals, IMAC ports, and compute centers to exert leverage. Bombing a complex state into a power vacuum without a defined political end state guarantees a heavily armed insurgency that will systematically dismantle the region's economic architecture. When these three networks are tightly coupled, a kinetic trigger causes simultaneous systemic failure across the entire global landscape. Managing this chaos requires a sustained surge in military deployments to secure the region, carrying immense, open-ended operational costs. This sustained deployment risks fulfilling the president's $1.5 trillion defense spending request, a 50% surge in the budget that balloons the national deficit and drives up long-term bond yields. The operation may degrade Iranian capabilities, but the financial, inflationary, and infrastructural burden falls entirely on Washington and global markets. Modern grand strategy hinges on whether the interconnected global system can survive the tactical destruction of its primary nodes.